All right, Joel Gausten here from joelgausten.com. This is going to be a great one. It's a pleasure to welcome an old friend of mine. He's a multimedia artist, an author, an educator, a musical inventor, and a co-founding member of both Pigface and Lab Report. Coming to me from somewhere in the Midwest, Mr. Matt Schultz. How you doing, man?
I'm doing great, Joel. Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Oh
It's kind
yeah,
of exciting.
yeah, I'm looking forward to this one for real. And we have a lot of ground to cover, and there's a
Yeah.
lot of potential ground that we may not tread in this conversation. But I figured, maybe the most natural place to start would be what I would imagine would be the most natural reference point for a lot of people, and that would be your musical
Yeah.
endeavors. So from my knowledge bank, that really hit my radar early 90s via two particular projects, Lab Report and Pigface. But to kind of go a little bit before then, um, what were your musical aspirations prior to getting involved in those two projects?
Well, it's strange because, I've been thinking about this too, since we talked about doing this and kind of reflecting back historically. Plus, I've been rebuilding my website, like my actual large portfolio website, which is a really cool contextualization. You're looking back at all the stuff you've done. And I don't, what's strange is that I grew up, here in the Midwest, and it's, back, and I'm an old guy. So, it was radio and you'd go to the record store. And I mean, these were all fun things, but I remember being completely mortified in a way that there wasn't better music. I like, as a child, we used to go to this swimming pool in the summertime, and they had like top 40 radio. This would have been the 70s, right? And it would be like, like a Billy Joel song or something, which now I can appreciate. But back then as a kid, maybe even ABBA I could appreciate now. But back as a child, I was just like, why are they playing this every hour on the hour? And it mortified me. Like, I remember being, as a kid, like, pretty upset that there wasn't more broad spectrum of things to enjoy. And I had an older brother, and I remember he gave me he gave me like my first Motorhead album, and you're like, excuse me, what is this? And he was a big Pink Floyd fan. And of course I became a big Pink Floyd fan. And then I think the real thing of it was that kind of like the psychedelic ambience of, certain Floyd, long take 60s trippy stuff. And then it was movie soundtracks. I would be fascinated by the movie soundtracks. And I remember Apocalypse Now came out in 78. I would have been 12. We went to the theater and saw it as a 12-year-old, right? I think it was 78. Have to be whatever year that was, actually. And then buying the album, and the album was the exact movie laid on vinyl. Like, it wasn't just the songs, it was all of the dialogue, So like at the beginning, when he rips up and he's got the blinds and he's like, Saigon, shit, I'm still only in Saigon. Like, I memorized that album like it was a Pink Floyd record, and something about the ambient music and the tone and the construction of it being outside of a structured rock song really appealed to me.
Mm. Mm.
Like, I think that was the first point where I saw that there could be something else other than being in a rock band, like,
Yeah.
because I only saw that there were rock bands. Like, I only thought the jobs you could get in real life were like what my dad did and what my mom did. I didn't realize, living in the country, that there was a wide array of things you could do with your life, So it's being, growing up in a very small bubble, and that was a way of bursting out of that bubble, was listening to, and trying to find more experimental music.
Definitely. When I introduced you earlier, I very intentionally used the words musical inventor. I know a lot of musicians, obviously. I even know musicians who bang on oil cans and all that,
Yep.
but I don't know anyone else who actually has invented their own instrument. And that particular instrument had a major impact, certainly on Lab Report and especially on early Pigface recordings, and that is the anti-tank guitar, or the ATG.
Yeah.
which from my experience is still one of the most fascinating creations I've ever encountered sonically. So how would you introduce someone to your creative process behind the ATG and what you're looking to accomplish in bringing that into this world?
Um, yeah, that's a great question. And it's funny because I remember, okay, so let's preface this. And I think I'm on, because again, I've been consolidating all the old records and reposting them on Bandcamp just recently. But I'm not a musician. I mean, I played French horn when I was a kid. I can, a little bit of piano. I can sit down and look at the note and find the key, but I can't. I'm totally like the unrhythmically orientated white guy. You know what I mean? Like I'm terrible at a sense of timing and beat. I have no idea. Like when people say it's in the key of G, I just whatever. I really don't know what that means. My thing is to create these atmospheres, right? And that's all I care about, and it's all I really kind of still care about. I mean, again, I can kind of understand when I play with some other people if they talk about this stuff, but I don't count why I play. I hate counting. I hate looking at sheet music. I'm not. My brain does not work that way, so I need to start with that. And I remember being a child and somebody gave me a guitar. And of course, I didn't know how to play it. So it was very unsatisfying for me. And I lived in the country and I didn't know anyone had to teach me or anything. There wasn't, any video. There was nothing, right? So you just had this thing sitting there with an amplifier that could make a tone. And I remember taking the hemostats, they used them for roach clips, right? Like back in the day. And I would clip it on the string below, which I now know, like, depending on how you tune your guitar, but the largest string, right? So like D, right? And then using the knurled parts of the thing, I would rub that string and basically doing exactly what a cello bow or ebo, Brian Eno's Ebo would do by just perpetually resonating this tone. And for some reason, I would wear headphones and put this to 11 and just grind these tones. And I really didn't understand what I was doing back then. I didn't have a context for it. I just knew it felt great just to have this sustained grinding tone. And I think now that having, worked as an ayahuasca facilitator and traveled the world with all these different healing modalities and working with indigenous peoples and those things, is that this is like some form of meditative tonal therapy, which, if you could like chakra tones, right? So, I might have been resonating the root chakra as a means of grounding myself as a hyperactive autistic kid. Like it seemed to work, and that just kept going. And I would experiment with making sounds because I didn't know how to play instruments. So that was the whole thing, was just like, well, what can I get out of this without having to make chords? And by the time I got to college, I had a friend who just took some wire and he mounted it on like a railroad tie, and he put a pickup under there. And I was like, this is a great idea, but what if we could tune it? And what if I could make it portable? And so I kind of took what was just this really loose concept from a friend and really built it into a high-tech tunable device, with multiple strings. And again, there was a certain musicianship quality to it, but, I was using like 18 gauge wire to 24 gauge wire. I knew how to tune them, right? Like I'm DADGAD or whatever I wanted to tune it out. It was 10 strings, 6 over guitar pickups and 4 over bass. So I know that matched, but a lot of it was just about creating an atmosphere that was powerful enough that it would make you transcend your experience, which is, I think, what music in general is foundationally designed to do,
Well, from my perspective, mission accomplished, because the first time I ever saw Pigface was in '93. And that was with Lab Report opening that tour. And for those who don't remember that era of Pigface, the way a typical show would come to be is Lab Report would open, and you and at that time Eric Pounder was the other person in the band. You guys would do like these extended soundscapes, and during the final one, it'd go on for several minutes, and you'd hear like the hi-hat start to and then like the toms would come in, and then bang, there's Pigface for the next hour plus. But being in that audience, when I saw you guys and Pigface, but when I saw Lab Report, it was like the ocean had washed over me. And it was one of the most equally, it was simultaneously surreal and frightening. It was like you're caught in a wave that you can't get out of, and then it would just sort of take over. I wish that, I mean, I know there are videos and there are Pigface albums with the ATG. I wish you were in the audience during a lab report performance, because it's an experience that I wish you would experience, even though you were the creative force behind it.
um Yeah, well, thank you. I mean, that's amazing, Joel. Thank you. Yeah, I wish I was in that audience too, because I also didn't like playing live as much as I loved playing live. It's a very weird thing for me. Like I have musician friends, and again, I've been in the business for many, many decades. And everybody has a different reason for performing, right? You're a folk singer and you wrote these beautiful songs, and that's your wonderful way of expressing yourself to the audience. And maybe you're what Billy Corgan, we grew up with Jimmy, and when I was up in Chicago, the Chamberlain and stuff drumming for the Pumpkins and things like that. So he's a very technical musician. So when you hang out and talk about this stuff, his thing was kind of approaching it from a very, very technical, precise, really song, because he wrote most of the songs with Billy anyway. So like that was very precise stuff for him, right? And I'm sure Billy was just expressing himself outside of Footnote destroying male vocals forever. But the thing is that Lab Report and Pigface, and again, I'm glad, I'm honored that I was one of the original members of Pigface, and it was a great project. But I enjoy industrial music, right? I get it, like Ministry industrial music, right? Or Pigface industrial, not TG industrial, but I love TG industrial, right? So to me, Einstein's and the Neubauten, TG, those were like true industrial, right? The other one was like techno industrial. I mean, Halloween just happened, and I was listening to Spotify's Halloween station, which is like spooky songs from the Monkees. And then Ministry's Halloween came on. I was like, wow, this is the cheesiest song. It's contextually, it's amazing. It's just literally a techno tune. How he ended up where he's at is a great arc of amazement, right? And fantastic. But again, that's moving music. I don't want to demean anybody else's music in that sense. I know it's moving for everybody. All music is moving in a different way. But I think that foundational, weird, abstract, tonal things that me and specifically me, try to create is to take you further than that. Like, I feel aggressive and this is happy rock song, whether that's in any genre, right? Like, what I mean? Like, I listen to blues songs, like, that's a great blues song, right? But I'm not transcending. And I think my point and my goal has always been, and still is, to get somebody to transcend. I literally have been working with another local artist, sound artist. Believe it or not, we're both in Springfield, Illinois. It's amazing. There's 4 avant-garde sound artists in this town now. It's unbelievable. Wow. And we were having a talk yesterday, and that was exactly what we were both agreeing on, was that it's a form of hallucination without chemicals, and I think that leads to why I did the ayahuasca. And as a child, I tripped a lot. I used to just take mouthfuls acid, when I was in college. So I'm always looking for that otherworldly experience. And I think the ambient music, or at least I create, and some of the stuff I like, is that it has that capability to intoxicate you to a point of traveling, right? Mm-hmm. Without drugs. And then, of course, if you choose to do drugs, it's just that much more traveling and more powerful.
Right. Yeah. My own perspective with Pigface is kind of a dual one, because I was an audience member for years, and then I was a band member in Pigface for years.
Yeah.
Regrettably not with you.
At our time, we needed to sync that up.
Yeah. But I can honestly say, from an audience member's perspective, before I got involved in all of that, I thought the ATG was absolutely critical to the initial presentation and sound of Pigface. And it was a presence that, frankly, was missed by the time I got involved,
Well, thank you.
I mean, it was definitely a tremendous foundation of what the Pigface experience was for me. was via the ATG. And of course, the ATG carried on further with Lab Report. My personal favorite Lab Report album is the second one, Unhealthy,
Yeah.
which still fucks me up. I mean, that's such a powerful record. And that's the record where you have Genesis, P-Orridge, and Lydia Lunch involved. How did they become part of that greater picture of Lab Report at that time?
Well, Pigface was designed as a, I mean, in the most simple sense, it was a business venture where the institution could capitalize on all the talent around and then just create this kind of project that would rotate members out in and out. So, I mean, conceptually, it's a cool idea. And that's why I think it's at 150 functioning members at this point now, if you go to Wikipedia and look it up. So, I mean, that's a great idea. It's a bit weird because, again, you're kind of throwing this stuff out and seeing what happens, broad net. And I know they threw out a broad net and invited Lydia and Jen to play with them. And it was at the Metro in Chicago. They'd flown them both in. And Lab Report, as you said, was opening up on that tour. And, a lot of what that early Lab Report was all improvisational. Like those first two records were complete just jams, that we recorded live. And while we were, Pigface sound checked, and they kind of stood around, and both Lydia and Jen, I remember this very specifically, were kind of, like, oh, whatever, and then Lab Report went and sound checked, and Jen's like, I mean, she just came up on stage. It was like, I want to play with these guys. And Lydia kind of followed her up there and said the exact same thing. And honestly, Lydia refused to play with Pigface at that show. She didn't want really anything to do with that stylized techno industrial. She wanted to experiment with Lab Report. And that's exactly what we did. And Jen brought up they had a whole bank of tapes, which were old Throbbing Gristle tapes. So this was, to me, quite literally having the most pinnacly influential human being in my music life go, hey, you kind of sound what I used to sound like, which is my most favorite band ever, Throbbing Gristle. Can I play with you? And of course, it was just, a full cycle dream come true for me. I mean, it was just splendid. And we developed a friendship, and it was just, she really was a very amazing human being. I mean, like, if that human being's even the correct term, I would say more alien, definitely. And then Lydia just had, journals of poems and stuff she had written that she just went off on. And so we had a great time. We recorded that show, and that became Unhealthy, no pun intended.
Yeah. Jen was utterly fascinating. To this day, perhaps the most intuitive and sharpest conversationalist I've ever encountered. And I mean, the way she could take a morsel of something you said and then go off for 20 minutes and then return right to where you began with the point was just, it was a rare talent for sure.
I mean, I think, like, there's two, I'm brainstorming this right now, and I hope this isn't insulting or offensive to anybody, but I think there's two characters that could do that. Godheads, well, maybe three, like Godheads, demons, and serial killers, right? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, you're either a god or a serial killer, because the ability to lock into your frequency and then kind of, as you said, like, really kind of caress you and indulge you and support you and bring you up and offer more information to you. This idea you had, you're absolutely right. Their ability to log in to you was inhuman. It wasn't human. That is what I know for sure. I don't know, as you said, any other humans that had that astute of an ability to do that.
Yeah, Jen was from somewhere else for sure.
Yes. Absolutely. Yeah. Wonderfully so.
Yes. So Lab Report does carry on through the 90s. There are other releases under that name. Correct me if I'm wrong. It was the early 2000s when Lab Report kind of went on hiatus for quite a while. Do I have that right?
Yes, that's very much right. So for us to do Lab Report was without a doubt a cathartic vomit so we would usually, and we all lived together in that loft. So it was the early albums were it was Eric Pounder, Chris Blazin, and myself were the steadfast members. And every Sunday, we would basically get intoxicated in some way, shape, or form, whether it be LSD or pot or drinking or whatever, and then jam all day in this factory, right? And then record that onto an old school 4-track recorder. And then we had a PA system because this loft was so big that our home stereo was quite literally 1/4 the Smart Bar Metro system was our stereo, right? And so we would go back and then re-listen to it on that, and then remix it and then edit it and come up with stuff. And that was how we practiced, right? So like when we wrote songs, again, most bands are like, here's the lyrics. So the song is the title. Well, we didn't have lyrics. And then, sometimes it'd be like key of D. And because I knew I tuned these on D and I'm playing between Ds and like, it was that pretty. Chris plays guitar, Matt plays keyboards, and Eric plays the garage door spring. Like that was a song that we knew, on our set list, right? So, we would do that. And for us, it very much was a cathartic. I used to say in interviews that what we were doing was expressing the collective unconsciousness, and it's some pompous thing. And now, I mean, honestly, we were just all a bit psychotic at that time in our lives. There's excessive drug abuse. It was very unhealthy times. The partying 90s scene, heroin was coming in vogue at that time at the beginning. It was everything was out of hand, and we were pushing that envelope. And it was unhealthy. But Lab Report, in a weird way, was a very much a therapy session. So we could get it out, we could get it recorded. Often I would listen to it back, and I would say this, I was notorious for this quote. It was almost a pun I would drop every time I look at the guys, turn down the volume and go, who listens to this shit? And then like throttle it back up, and we'd be listening to it. And we had, this is in the old days too. So we were on Invisible Records, and we had a PO box for fan mail. And like every month we would go get the mail, and it was a lot, and we'd answer all letters. I mean, it was just so old school. I wish we had social media back then, right, Joe? Like I remember walking up the hill, in the snow with letters. It's true. We would get these letters and answer them. And every now and then we would get a highly disturbed individual that would say, like, I love your band and I want to kill everybody. It makes me want to murder people. And we would take due diligence and write these people back and say, hey, man, for all intents and purposes, this is Black comedy. This is a form of therapy for us. It's satire to some degree, or like, I'm trying to show you such a hellscape that you will actually, and this is a truth, because we used to show all that dirty porn in slow motion too. Like, I was basically creating such a hellscape that maybe you would turn yourself around, and it might have been really me talking to me. Do you know what I mean? And because it was just like, how far can we push this envelope? And it was when I look back on it, it's abusive, man. It was really abusive and juvenile. And so we would try to deflect this to these pen pals, these fans that were writing us, and say, literally go get some help if you need it, like, hey, you can write back anytime. I'll answer any letter, but, murder people because you listen to Lab Report isn't what I'm in a band about, Cool. And I remember that at the end, it got to this point where, I went to the bandmate and I said, hey, did you answer the letters? And they were like, yeah, and they were kind of tired of it. And they said, oh, I got one of those crazy ones. And I said, well, did you take the due diligence? And they were like, no, I wrote them back and told them to do it. And I was like, excuse me? And he's like, yeah, imagine what the publicity, like what, like the Satan worshiping 80s stuff, like, and I was like this, I just couldn't believe that we were friends. I had been friends. I was really, but I just was, I remember I looked at him and I go, this band is over. And that was it. That was done. And he signed off the rights to everything because he didn't give a shit. And I went on and did something solo under the same moniker. And then I was just like, you know what? I think I should just give that whole name up because it was tied to that. Like if you're listening to my music and you want to kill people, I'm not doing a good job as an artist. Mm. And I know it's subjective, right? Like you can't help it. Somebody to listen to ABBA and want to kill people. I mean, sometimes I would want to kill people listening to ABBA being, the worst band, like the most irritating pop culture cringe in the world for me. But I mean, lab report, I just like suddenly it was like, we need to be responsible like this. And to put it out and promote it. And like, there was all that kind of this quasi serial killer and death and murder and all this torture, darkness to it. And maybe I also outgrew it and I just got kind of tired of it, but that was it.
Well, you did bring it back for at least one show in 2015.
Yeah.
I It was like the second or third Cold Waves, I think, something like that. And I was at that show at the Metro. You had put together what I would imagine would be the final lab report performance. Is that right?
Yes, without a doubt.
Yeah. And it when I saw you in 93 versus when I saw you in 2015 was a completely different experience. The presentation was different, the music was different, obviously the other participants were different as well. What was your aim for lab report circa 2015 versus lab report circa unhealthy?
Well, it's funny because Novak got a hold of me. Of course, he's the head of Cold Waves and he wanted me to play and they wanted me to bring the ATG. And to be honest, I had sold even my last ATG at that point, right, to somebody. And I practiced non-attachment for quite a few years. And so what was happening was, it's like I was getting rid of every single possession. And up until last year, I'd gotten everything to fit into a double closet, right? So like everything I owned. So again, like, you're purging with, these things I built, the original ATGs, I was giving them to friends and selling them. I had like 4 of them. So I was purging everything, right? And this was a different cathartic thing. And at the same time, I was becoming very interested in Native American culture and indigenous cultures, all of this. What year was that Cold Waves again, Joel?
2015.
15. Yeah. So this is exactly it. So in 7 to 10, I'd worked with a Lakota elder and became a fire tender, and I was named. And then I went to Guatemala and I spent years on and off down there in Mexico working with Mayan elders and using sacred medicine. So my perspective radically shifted, right? Radically. And I did this performance, and what the performance was called the Crowning of the Crow. And I'd made this costume. It's a very cool pre-plague, plague doctors aren't so in vogue now. And this was pre-plague doctors, but it was a big crow, looked like a plague doctor. And then I usually get dressed up as Shiva. I paint myself blue and wear Indian clothes. And then we walk around and gather a crowd in a city. And then we stop somewhere and I take out my medicine bag and I sage cleanse them as we would if you were at a Native American, like a Lakota ritual, right? So, Jason's like, he wanted the old lab report. And I was so completely like, I had been a decade over it, easily more than a decade over it. And I had worked at the Metro to boot. So this was a double whammy. And I'm like, I want to do the performance because, again, I don't even have band gear. Like, so how can we even play live? We can't. So we went and I got all these different performers and it was fantastic. And then we crowned. What happened when we do the ceremony, we usually find somebody and then we turn them into the crow. And then they kind of bless the crowd while I cleanse everything, right? So I'm using, sage to sage the crowd. You were there, you smelled it. Agua de Florida, you're blowing it out of your mouth. And I was cleaning the Metro as well. And I had sent a bill when I got done. This is sidebar. I sent a bill to Joe Shanahan for $40,000 for purging the evil spirits and energy of the Metro, which he thought was extremely funny. Yeah. So again, I was there about doing a performance and kind of to some degree expressing that lab report does not exist in any way, shape, or form as it did, and to pay for the sins of lab report by doing something beautiful. Like we had this all white clown. You can actually view the video of this on mattschultzartist.com. It's under performance. Like the whole show is there. And we had that one clown and we had bought like 50,000 rose petals from a florist that supplied like for weddings. And he was just throwing these. It was so splendid, man. It was the exact opposite of industrial night. Like to me, it was the perfect beautiful. You know, Shiva was there, the crow, Kali was there. It was very Hindu referenced, beautiful. Oh, I loved it. That was a great show.
Yeah, it was, and a very fitting farewell to Lab Report, indeed.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
It's funny. The reviews that came out after that were like typical stuff, you know, like it was like, you know, so-and-so is typical, typical, typical. And then it was like Lab Report shocks us once more again by not doing what Lab Report does, you know,
right.
except for to shock us. So that it worked out well. Yeah. I'm very proud of that show too.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And I had known you for quite a few years
Yeah.
to that point. When you and I first connected, I believe it was during the era when you were heavily involved in a project called The Division.
Yes.
I absolutely loved and still to this day very fascinated with. Walk me through The Division. What was
Oh,
that to the layman? What was The Division and the aims of that endeavor?
oh, this is exciting. Thank you for that question. I love it because the division is, to me, greater than any other art project that I have done before, previous, since, whatever. It's just, it was in 2007. What I did is I developed a hermetic order like the Freemasons called the Division. And I was in graduate school, and it was I got a full ride to go to Southern, so it was a 3-year program. And within 6 months of being there, because usually you explore your you know, I was in multimedia and sculpture, and so you would explore that, and then your last year you do your thesis. And I remember going to my mentor saying, you know, I know where I want to go. Can I just start now? It was the first semester. He's like, of course, please. So for the next 2 years, I worked on the division. And what it is it's a conceptual piece in the sense that I really did come up with a hermetic order that has, you know, a creation myth, a philosophy, a morality, all of this stuff. And it was presented as a farcical thing. But that, I mean, to those that know, but it was presented as authentic then, you know, so there was this kind of looping meta quality to it. And it contains over 50 sculptures. So I had life-size wax figures of myself through reincarnations of my past lives, right? So the last 3 reincarnations that I have had. And so again, to me, like when I'm talking to my faculty and the chair and the advisors, I'm like, it's all funny, but the super meta irony to it is I believe it, right? So like, that's the funniest catch of all is that it's presented as a joke, but really I actually kind of believe it, right? And so it has all these characters, antiquities. So like they had like magic kits. It's very Crowley too, like the tone, because Crowley and that Freemasonry and Duchamp, you know, there was this whole black magic undertone to these people, Madame Blavatsky, you know, and all that. And so I had, you know, I had magic kits and I had sculpted heads and I had cave wall paintings that were actually walls of caves, like pulled out 3-dimensional huge chunks of what looked like rock, and people thought it was cave wall paintings. And you know, the unknown soldier was a Vietnam vet who made this military medic bike, and it had all this magic to it. And again, if you go to Matt Schultz Artist and hit the division, you can see it. And I just redid the website for the division as well, because where I'm at now, I'm settling down again, and I'm starting to recollect things. And I got into an art collective here in my hometown, so I'm going to probably re-up the division and start working on it again.
Awesome.
Yeah, because this thing was amazing. So the university, because everybody knew I had spent years building this thing, and they were watching me do it the whole time and defending it, and I was writing about it and doing essays on it. And it's that they gave me the university museum for like a month, which was unheard of. You usually get like a student gallery for a week. And it was fantastic. It was one of the highest attended receptions there, reception weekends. I had some great accolades from academics that I respect beyond belief, you know, were like, it was, I'm very, very proud of that. I put a lot of work into it. I earned that show, and it's an amazing project. Now, at the same time I was doing that, I recorded 2 albums to support all the sculptures and the division's motif, right? And Lynn's Records signed me and put those records out. God bless them for doing such at a time when I was like, if you think you can sell a CD, go for it, you know? And But what was interesting is that a lot of the sound then, I had audio tours of the museum exhibition that were 20 minutes long. So what was happening was this, and this is the construct of, because I deal with propaganda manipulation regularly throughout my artwork. The average piece of art is 3 seconds. That's how long somebody will view it. So if you go to the Museum of Contemporary Art and you see Van Gogh's Starry Night, you may spend a minute there, but all the rest of the art you're spending less than a second on to compensate for that 3 second average. So I wanted to up that average. You're not giving a piece what it deserves sometimes at maybe a minute of observation. You need to really sit with this piece and take it in. And so I realized a way to manipulate the viewer was to make them have an audio tour and then have the audio tour different than the printed text plaques. So it was kind of this secret prize people got. And so what they would do is you would come to the museum exhibition, you would walk around, it would take you about 15 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever. It blows through it, reads this stuff if they even read it. And then they'd come up and I would give them this. I had 12 headsets. So they would then go to the headset and it had a different level of information. And they would then, and I would go like, I narrated it again through my website. You can actually listen to this audio file for this. I'd be like, go to number 3, and then like I would pause and play the music that was on the Division Mantras or Militant. That's the 2 albums that I put out for the Division. And then what I would do is I would just stagnate that and make you sit there while listening to this music. And you may be done in your mind. And I knew conceptually, timing and so, I'd hold you there too long and then I go like, go to number 4, so I would force you to do this. Now, within this entire system, I had a friend at that time, and she was a comedian and an actress in communications department. And I wrote a script for like an 8-year-old, 10-year-old girl. And then she plays on one of the 12 headsets. It shorts out 30 seconds into it. And she goes, I found the record button, that old fuddy-duddy. And she goes, I'm going to leave my own tour because he's boring. And then she proceeds to go to every single object and make fun of it. And what she's doing is she's giving up the truth about each object, right? And she's doing it comedically and with humor. So as the performative piece goes of doing this huge performance that I'm orchestrating in this museum is that, museums are very quiet and people whisper and they're very proper. It's like church, and then this one dude is just laughing his ass off. Right. And so all the other people would go up to him and they'd take their headphones, go like, what are you listening to? Because this is kind of, not funny. And he's like, dude, this chick, she broke the tour, and it's hilarious. She's making fun of all the artwork. And so they would then come back to me after 20 minutes. So remember, this is 2 loops they've been around, right? 15 minutes, 20 minutes. They come back and go, I want to hear what the girl did. And I'd say, oh, I have a list. It was legitimately an hour to 2 hours long. I would say, I'll put your name on the list. Give me your driver's license. So now I'm holding them captive. You see what I mean? So they would be like, okay. And I feel free to go back in the museum and look at it again. So now I'm forcing them to spend more time in the museum. And then they would come back and finally get the girl thing. So I was basically manipulating through this strategy to get people to observe the museum exhibition for over an hour.
Fucking amazing, man.
Thank you. It wasn't negatively manipulative. People loved it, but it was a construct, as so many things in our life are constructs to get us to do things. Do we have free will or not even? But this was very much this thing, or they would go have free food or whatever, but they would hang out longer. And it worked because they did absorb what was up to 3 to 4 layers of data about this one museum exhibition. So the more time they spent with it, the more they learned and the more secrets were imbued to them, very much like Freemasonry.
And what kind of feedback did you generally receive from folks who took this whole experience in?
It was broad. Everybody really did enjoy it. A lot of people thought that I had went and kind of lazily found or conveniently found this Masonic Lodge that closed, bought everything and just installed it in there, which was to me hilarious. Most people didn't know that I made and hand built every single object in that thing. That was what my thesis was. It was showing off my sculpting capabilities, my literary, my writing capabilities, all of these, my musical capabilities, all this stuff was encompassed in that. You know, the head of mass comm, the entire school of mass communications, which Southern is notoriously, well, not notoriously, but they're known for, a very, very high level school of mass comm. He came to me, was like, you know, I've been here, whatever, 30 years. This is the best exhibition I've ever seen inside and outside of the university. And I was like, gold star for me, you know, like that's it. And then the head of Yale University Student Gallery was another one who thoroughly enjoyed it so much that he set up a meeting and we talked about it for over 2 hours. He grilled me to see if I knew, you know, what I was doing. Like, you know, he knew what, but do I actually know? You know, and he wanted it to go to Mass MoCA, which is the Massachusetts Museum of Contemporary Art, which again, through a certain thing of series of program derailment, I didn't get it there. And now I would like to reformulate that and attempt it once again, you know.
Yeah, well, that'd be awesome because I'm up in New England. So
perfect. Yes, you can come down and help me set it up.
yes, absolutely. Now you've mentioned a few times, you know, faculty and universities and such. We should mention that you have worked as an educator. Yep. In addition to your sonic and artistic exploits. When and how did you first get involved in education, actually taking on that side of things?
Well, I was a graphic designer by trade from the 90s on to a large degree. And then it would have been around 2005. I was kind of getting a little burnt out from doing graphic design so much. And I was I was an art director for some firms. And what would happen is that I would put out ads, you know, I would post for jobs, and what I was getting, like the resumes I was getting were insane. They were just horrible. I was shocked actually that our higher ed was pushing out, you know, these bachelor students with graphic design degrees, and this is what they were submitting to me. And so I was like, I need to go back and teach. And I've always been a vocal person, and I love teaching and sharing and all of these things. So it just seems like a natural thing for me, and very much so. It is a natural thing. I think the problem is that contemporary society and higher ed in America is just an absolute shit show hellscape now. I mean, it's just incomprehensibly brutal and horrible on so many levels. But back in 2005, I was ambitious. I went back on a bachelor's. Then I got, you know, I went to grad school because you have to have a master's to teach. And then I became an adjunct professor, not realizing that they're just, you know, completely exploited, grotesquely underpaid. I was working at 3 universities in central Illinois in 2 cities, 90 miles apart. And I did the math at that time. I was making $2.31 an hour, you know, so, you know, and realizing that, having my dreams kind of deflated there, and I kept it up. And I just recently, because I went back and took a graphic design job at a really good institution, but I finally gave up teaching. I was teaching online UI, UX, prototyping and development for a European company, mentoring the students, and even them, you know, which they're a for-profit institution, you know, I cringe when I see what they're trying to convince these kids of, you know. And higher ed, honestly, I'll say it's no different. I mean, at this point, God bless that people are starting, like Gen Z's waking up. You know, the millennials woke up a little bit. The Gen X, we were completely lied to that, you know, this degree would get you everything you wanted, and American dream. By the time we were there, the American dream in mid 80s was already dead, you know. And so, yeah, I love teaching. I think I'm really good at it. My students, I get great reviews from them. They love it. They learn, they go on and get good jobs, but the institution itself absolutely hates me, man. Because I usually started out my first day of class asking how many students took out loans. And then I would say, do you know what bankruptcy is? And they were like, no. And I was like, well, let's stop this class right now and learn what bankruptcy is, and that you can't declare it off those student loans. And they would tell me that finally we get back to the administration, and they would say, would you quit discouraging the students? And I said, would you quit exploiting them or making them indentured servants into loans they can never have forgiven? Right. You know? And they're like, see you. And I'm like, fine, let's part ways, because morally, I don't agree. Conceptually, higher ed's, of course, genius, right? It's wonderful to perpetuate your education and learn, especially liberal arts, to learn a little bit of this and that. It's splendid. But in action and practice, higher ed is like a brutal banking system that's masked itself behind education to basically create indentured servants to the American capitalistic laissez-faire system. You know?
Right. I mean, it was clearly a business when I was in college a quarter century ago. I can only
Yeah.
can imagine what it is like today. You know, it's just
Well, I mean, and here's the thing too, like, not to get it political, and we'll cut this short, but I voted for Biden. Of course, I wanted to have some responsibility back in there, even if it was an inept old unconscious man, but whatever. But it was Biden. These loan forgiveness things are literally trickles in the bucket. And a lot of them are kind of geared towards Trump University, which was totally for-profit, completely exploitative. They were just, like I said, they're intermediary loan systems is all they are. They're a bank that's looking to entrap you into high interest rate, no default loans that you can never declare bankruptcy at. So, but it was Biden was the one who did pass the bill in Congress, if I'm correct, back in the 70s, that you could not declare bankruptcy against your college loans. And to a certain degree, that changed the entire higher ed system, because then they realized they could capitalize on this fact. So if there's anybody out there that destroyed higher ed, the most pointable finger would be Joe Biden. Like, I'm not kidding you, and then one of the secondary things is just middle management bloated itself out and sucked like a vampire from all the corners of the institution, right? And so they kept feeding themselves and their colleagues other middle management jobs, so like there's this huge middle management wealth bubble in higher ed that the faculty are just looking at, and everybody's like, what's this about? So yeah, it's a shame. I love teaching. I really do get the most satisfaction from it.
Well, in addition to teaching, you've also done a fair amount of writing. So I wanted to get into a project dear to my heart as well.
Yes, thank you.
Would be this book, which may or may not come out on the video.
Yeah.
But the book is called The Dark and the Light: Trauma, Addiction, Shamanism, and Ayahuasca. These are, I guess we can call it your memoirs.
Yeah.
This was published in 2021. I had the honor of editing the first edition, and you and I are currently working on an updated edition of the book.
Yes.
Before I get into asking you about the book itself, I have to commend you, because, as you know, around that time, I published a book myself called The 3 A.M. Girls and More.
Yep.
Pardon me. And it was a lot of ways the most personal thing I've ever written. It was kind of my coming out party as far as all the craziness I was involved in at that time, and dark and sometimes light, but mostly kind of crazy. And I really had to ask myself, do I want to put this on the page? Do I want to kind of lay myself bare in this fashion? And I ultimately made the decision to do so, because if you're going to write about your life, you have to write about your life, and you have to be self-honest. And that means exposing all the things, not just the things that make you look wonderful, but expose all of them. So that's what I endeavored to do. And I bring that up because I was very kind of happy with myself when I published that book. Then I read your fucking book, and I realized that I didn't do shit, man, because you really put it out there. And so I commend you for that, because you've done something that few people would have the courage and ability to do. And I don't want to paint the book as necessarily dark or anything like that. There are certainly shades of that in it, but ultimately it's a very positive book, I find, and a very enlightening book. But I wanted to kind of hand the floor over to you, because it's a challenging book. It says a lot. Frankly, I'm going through the second edition of it now, And very much like the first, I had to take breaks from it. I have to give it a few days. Like, I've gone as far as I can go with this. In a beautiful way. I'm not putting it down. It's just,
no, I get it.
It's a punch to the gut in the most visceral way I can imagine. So with my sort of review out of the way,
Thank you.
how would you explain this book to somebody who comes up to you and says, "Hey, Matt, I heard you wrote a book. What's it about?"
Thank you. I appreciate all of that. It's so funny. I do remember we had deadlines and you're like, I can't do it. I can't meet deadline. I need a break. And I was like, dude, I totally get it, man. I completely get it. And I always remember too, Michael Girard from the Swans, one of his most poignant things, we were hanging out one time and he turns to me and he goes, "You're so incredibly visceral." And then he turned away. And I was like, that was for, I know from him, it was kind of an insult. And it was like, you should be more intellectual in a weird way. I like being passionate and emotional about things. It's my superpower. The dark and the light is, and again, I like to preface this, and it is an excuse. I'm totally using this as an excuse. Is I'm also not a writer, like I'm not a musician, right? But I will give it a go because I think everybody is everything, and you should never make a declaration that you're not something. Do you see what I mean? So like, if you go like, "Man, I'm not writing that book because I'm not a writer," then that stinks, because you should try writing that book. I did it. You gave me infinite amount of help to like, and I know it was belaboring for you, but you were very supportive. And we were all going through COVID too, and isolation and all that stuff. So it was really wonderful to get that. And they were it's basically journal entries that I have. And so when people ask about it, I do publicly kind of want to always say, like, I'm not a writer, so just bear with me. Like I really, again, I used to read fairly prolifically, but now, I mean, there's streaming services. They're just ruining our brain, right? So, with that said, it's a memoir, and it's also, there's I think, a very amusing and hilarious play right in the middle of it about these gods who meet and they take a tour and they come down to this blue marble and they basically, like Disneyland, play out humans for fun repeatedly over and over and over again. And I think that's a really great analogy for humanity, and dealing with reincarnation and these kind of ideals. And there's also some straight philosophy kind of in there. Like I have this whole "What Makes You You," which is a chapter that I think is kind of how a template of how I evaluate people to make myself more compassionate or empathetic to their character, right? So like, we get like, somebody treats you poorly, you're like, "Fuck you," like, right? Like that's the reaction back. But, if we can go like, "Hey man, they're projecting their trauma onto you, and their family comes from a background of highly traumatized, addicted people," and you can kind of start stacking this. I'm not making excuses, but for me, it helps me like really kind of settle down and be like, "Hey man, let's try to be more empathetic, more compassionate, more understanding about where they're coming from." And that's a reflection of me projecting, I wish other people would look at me that way. Do you know what I mean? Also, so instead of saying, because I was diagnosed as, on the spectrum, and very much ADHD and OCD and all of these things. And people don't see that. They just get mad at you, right? Like, they're like, "You're acting like a jerk." And you're like, "But in my head, it's all messed up, So anyway, I did the book. And I think the real reason I did it was because I was working with different spiritual modalities, particularly ayahuasca. And I'd moved to Peru and I was living in the jungle, and I was working with a facility down there as a facilitator. So the shaman are administering the ceremony and the medicine, and then I'm the gringo there to kind of help you contextualize the radical breakthrough experience you're going to have, which everybody does off of ayahuasca. Now, the problem was I started seeing charlatans within this, because there's no accreditation system whatsoever, right? Amongst shaman, like you can't, nowadays you go to the hospital and it says Dr. Smith. They were accredited as the doctor. You could kind of trust them. On these third world shamanic experiences, man, anybody can declare themselves a shaman. Gringos now are declaring themselves shamans, just utterly mortifying to me. And so what I was running across was that the shamanic indigenous practices was generating greater trauma to those seeking healing because it was being governed by those who should not be governing it. Right. And so the impetus to write the book was really that. Like, I wanted to kind of share these experiences in my memoir of nightmarish hellscape shit that happened, and that nobody's talking about because it gets poo-pooed. Like, the Peruvian government itself shuts down any negative press that happens at the ayahuasca centers outside of Iquitos in Peru. Right? Because there's 1,500 centers. That brings a massive amount of revenue to that region that would normally never happen. So I wrote the book, I assembled all these journal entries and then put it together kind of as I think it's amusing. I think it is startling. There is gut punching horrors in there. Because again, I think I try to address my own trauma very blatantly. Like, this happened to me. I don't go into detail because then it becomes trauma porn, right? And we're trauma bonding, which is not healthy in a certain way too. So what I want to do is explain, here I am, this what happened to me, here's where I went to see help, and maybe it'd work for you, but be cautious. That's kind of the overall theme.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And it's, like I said, ultimately a very positive book.
Thanks.
Those who make it to the end, and I encourage anyone who has the book or will get the book to see it through.
Yeah.
And it's okay to take breaks. I know, I can testify to that.
Yeah.
But make it to the end, because I think it ends with a very positive and beautiful message. And certainly when you and I were working on this, as you said, it was during the pandemic. And I think, I certainly needed that message during that time, so I thank you for involving me in the project.
Oh, thank you.
And as soon as I can get the second edition finished, we'll be on to that.
Yeah, because I have another little chapter I want to add to it that I was too scared to add to, because I mean, it's pretty blatant, but I did want to get into one of these final points, and I've kind of cathartically done that. And it does end, with kind of a philosophical chapter. And this is kind of relevant too to how we started. This is the callback or the loop to this entire discussion is that, it's about creating a reality where your frequencies are greater than, and you're not, and this is a bit new agey for some people, but it's true. It's just like, we're not dwelling in this kind of very low frequency, anger, depression, hatred, bigotry, all of these kind of things that, are all low frequency things. And we are starting to, and again, when I say we, I'm really speaking for me, right? Like, I would like to approach life, and I try to, under a much more compassionate stance, a more loving stance, a more heart open stance. That's what the whole Crow performance was me opening up heart to these people. I run Sweat Lodges event. I'm a water pourer. So like all of this stuff now is just about, creating a higher frequency for myself and those around me. So, and living in joy and happiness, I mean, like really having fun with comedy and everything, like being lighthearted, because the world is a ridiculously complicated hellscape to some degree, and we also have like the most blessed existence of any humanity. I mean, I'm literally in a house that never changes its temperature from 72 degrees. I get in a horseless carriage that can go well over 100 miles an hour and has the most amazing sound system on earth, playing the most beautiful music from the most beautiful people, right? And it's climate controlled, and there's a blizzard outside, and I can go visit my friends in another temperature controlled, environment and have wine from the other side of the world. I mean, what are we bitching about?
Yeah,
So
absolutely. I've always been of the mind that, you go on social media and you see people arguing over who has more privilege. Well, you're in a heated place. You have electricity to use your computer. You have the internet. You have social media, but we have it so bad, but we're so oppressed, so that's just a different perspective I have on it. It's like,
yeah. It's exactly the same thing. I think Bill Burr did that, where like you're in a plane flying over the planet holding a cocktail,
Yeah.
Again, I just think there's like, we've come so polarized in this country. You know, again, and I'm a, you know, pretty liberal guy, but the left is just ridiculous, and the right is just straight up fascist. Now they might as well just, I wish they would just declare the armband and go buy them and put them on, you know, at least we would know who they are. And the left is equally as militant about things. You know, we've gone this pendulum is just, it's so far. You know, my thing is, it's like, I would like to stay positive and happy, but at the same time, you know, and I don't want to turn a blind eye to the world and the plight of everything that's going on, but it's not that bad out there. I mean, we're really some lucky human beings, man.
Yeah, it could always be worse, and it's certainly worse for a lot of people, any number of places in the world besides where we are, you know.
And that's the thing. I've been traveling the world for the last, you know, what, 5 years, you know, living in Peru. Yeah. You want to see how people live, you know, go see people that live strictly in the jungle, you know?
Right.
Yeah. I mean, I had they had a gratitude board for Thanksgiving at my office, and people were putting, you know, like coffee and this coworker, and it was super sweet. Right. And I'm like, that's cool. You know, it's a corporate bonding experience, which somehow repulses me at the same time as I appreciate it. Right. But I was like, if I actually, and I told a colleague, I said, if I really put all of my gratitudes up there, you know, it'd blow your mind. Like it would blow. I was like, I am grateful that I have shoes.
Yeah.
You know, having really good shoes is amazing thing. And then I am most grateful that there's a roof over my head. I've lived in the jungle in a hut that had no walls, and animals and creatures would come in at night. It was insane, right? You know, like there's insane stuff happening to very poor people. Look at any homeless person in your town and imagine where they sleep that night, under what trestle, and what their reality looks like. Oh my God. We are so lucky, and I am so grateful that there are so many wonderful things and wonderful people and experiences. We get to express ourselves like no other. It's really quite amazing time to be alive.
Absolutely, man. I appreciate you saying that. As we wrap up, you mentioned your new website. Please share with me the best places people can go online to learn more about you and sample your music and things like that.
The best place to go is to mattschultzartist.com. It used to be mattschultz.com. I still house that. I'm just pointing everything over to a new server. Again, things are changing in the world, so you have to find new servers and new suppliers and domain housing. It's all a nightmare. But it was a good time to revamp the websites, update them. Like I said, the division, which hadn't been updated in quite a long time, is now completely updated. I just posted, if you go to the music button in the mattschultz.com or mattschultzartist.com website, I have 13 albums now that you can get. Some are free, have fun, thank you, right? And some are like, I think at most I charge $5, and you can pay more if you want. It's Bandcamp. They're all AIF. We don't need to print CDs anymore. Thank God we're in this world. See, again, I'm very grateful that our boys don't have to go die in Iraq for oil to print a CD for lab report to make people want to kill themselves. How's that for a loop?
That's some gen level shit right there, man.
It's true. It's true. Every time I print a CD, I was like, no, this is terrible. These kids are dying for this stuff. And like, what are they dying for? For a lab report CD? No. Go download it. It's fantastic. I love it. I've been re-listening to my old stuff. Some of it is mortifying to me, and not in a great horror movie soundtrack way, but just in a construction way. You're like, wow, I can't believe I put that out. But I again, I'm not a writer. I'm not a musician. And I encourage anybody, we're all artists at heart. Go make stuff. Don't ever let anything inhibit you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would encourage people as well, you know, as much as, you know, I'm a fan of Lab Report and of course your era of Pigface. For anyone watching this who knows Matt through predominantly the early Pigface records and Lab Report, I would strongly encourage you to check out Matt's other music on his website. There's some gorgeous stuff there from the later years that
Yeah.
show an evolution and show different musical possibilities. So I would encourage anyone to check out that site and check out the second edition of Matt's book when his editor gets his act together and finishes it.
Thank you, brother. I appreciate it.
Yeah, man, it's great chatting with you like this. It's been far too long. I'm very happy to know you,
You
and
too.
I'm really appreciative of what you've done to broaden my horizons, artistically and philosophically. So thank you very much for that. And I hope we can, well, we'll be in touch. We've got a book
Yes,
to finish, but I hope we can do this again sometime soon.
definitely, Joel. Thank you so much, brother. Thank you, man. So much heartfelt gratitude towards you.
Likewise, sir.